Johnny Carson detested Dean Martin to the core. We now understand why. For the cameras, they grinned. They made small talk on the air. For millions of American viewers, Dean Martin and Johnny Carson appeared to be Hollywood royalty who respected and bonded with one another. However, beneath that expertly constructed television persona was one of the most unexpected rivalries in entertainment, a profound, sincere hostility that Carson had toward Martin for many years. Although the late-night king was well known for his amiable manner and seeming ease in interacting with celebrities, his genuine sentiments toward the renowned crooner were everything but affectionate. We're unveiling this secret Hollywood feud today to show why one of America's most adored celebrities was so hated by television's most endearing host. A fascinating window into the nuanced personalities of these iconic figures and the irreconcilable divide between their professional values, which ultimately resulted in one of Carson's rare lifetime bans from The Tonight Show, is provided by the contrast between their public interactions and Carson's private contempt. The reality of this Cold War of comedy legends shows that there was more than simply a personality conflict between these two titans. There was a fundamental difference in their approaches to their trade, which is why Carson was finally unable to forgive what he perceived to be Martin's cardinal sins against entertainment in general. We must acknowledge how drastically different these two guys were, even though they held identical positions at the height of entertainment, in order to comprehend the depth of Carson's resentment toward Martin. The Tonight Show became the most prominent stage on television thanks to Johnny Carson's unwavering work ethic, precise timing, and rigorous preparation. He saw his job as a trade and an art that required a great deal of commitment. The ultimate cool guy who could enthrall audiences without seeming to try, Dean Martin, on the other hand, developed an air of effortless charm. His success stemmed from his seeming lack of preparation, which gave off an air of effortless genius that spectators couldn't resist. Insiders saw firsthand the simmering hatred that resulted from these competing ideologies colliding in the most significant arena of late-night television, which Carson rarely showed on broadcast. Let's examine the 6 main reasons why the most amiable host on television felt such deep contempt for the man referred to as the King of Cool. Hates too many times and attends a lot of shows, and I now value this. However, I dislike a lot of shows. Can I just say that Dean always showed up intoxicated? For Johnny Carson, The Tonight Show was the pinnacle of television art, a well-oiled machine where professionalism, timing, and planning gave the appearance of effortless amusement. In Carson's universe, every little thing counted, from the exact duration of his monologue to the meticulously planned cadence of his guest interviews. A straightforward talk show had become an American institution that could make or break careers with a single visit because to this methodical approach. Everything that went against Carson's entertainment philosophy was embodied by Dean Martin. Martin welcomed uncertainty and seeming spontaneity, whereas Carson established his name on dependability and regularity. However, Martin's practice of showing up on The Tonight Show in various drunken states, or at least putting on a passable impersonation of drunkenness, was what really enraged Carson. Martin made several appearances on The Tonight Show in the 1960s and early 1970s, nearly always portraying his well-known inebriated demeanor, slurring his words somewhat, and occasionally losing his line of thought, and conducting the interview as though it were a spontaneous discussion. Instead, it was at a cocktail party instead of a million-viewer television segment. Carson considered Martin's easygoing manner and seemingly uncensored remarks, which domestic viewers found endearing, to be a grave insult to the art of television. During these interviews, Carson would remain professional, but as soon as the cameras stopped rolling, he would vent his fury. According to several Tonight Show writers and producers. According to a veteran Tonight Show writer, Johnny cherished comedy accuracy more than anything else. He thought it took extraordinary dedication to make something tough appear simple. Dean pretended that discipline was completely irrelevant throughout his entire performance. It made Johnny nuts. The tipping point occurred at an appearance in 1976 when Martin's condition seemed to go beyond his typical drunken demeanor to actual disability. Staff members on hand that evening reported that Martin frequently lost his position in the middle of anecdotes, laughed uncontrollably at remarks that weren't meant as jokes, and at one point appeared to momentarily lose his location. Ever the professional, Carson handled the part without showing any signs of annoyance, but he reportedly made his feelings quite apparent to his producer backstage. "If it's an act, I don't care. Comedy isn't for you if you can't complete a sentence. Airtime is being wasted by you." This comment, which was cited by a number of staff members who worked on the show at the time, succinctly captured Carson's core grievance with Martin. For Carson, comedy was a fine art that needed to be performed flawlessly. Martin saw it as a mindset, a feeling, and an air of laid-back coolness that didn't have to adhere to the conventions of traditional performance. Martin's invitations to The Tonight Show significantly decreased after this performance, the first sign that Carson's booking choices were starting to be influenced by his own frustration. Although it wasn't a ban yet, it signaled the start of the cooling-off phase that would ultimately result in Martin's total removal from the program. This was especially noteworthy because Carson typically tolerates celebrities who have drinking problems. Although celebrities like Peter O'Toole, Richard Burton, and Dean Martin were notorious for drinking, Carson usually allowed their conduct as long as it was amusing and professional. In Carson's opinion, Martin went too far when he appeared to use actual or fake booze in place of preparation, a transgression that cannot be forgiven by the most prepared performer on television. What a dude. What a show. Whoa, this is it. It's two. Interviews were never taken seriously by Dean. Beyond Martin's seeming drunkenness, the singer's attitude toward the main goal of a talk show, conversation, was what really annoyed Carson. The popularity of The Tonight Show was primarily due to Carson's exceptional interviewing abilities. His capacity to steer discussions, respond on the go, and enhance visitors' appearances by using thoughtfully constructed questions and sincere listening. Carson was a really serious person about this craft. Despite his easygoing manner, Carson spent a lot of time preparing for interviews, going over the data his staff had put together, and creating possible lines of inquiry that would best highlight each guest. He saw the interview portion as a cooperative performance with distinct roles, rather than as a light-hearted conversation. But Martin's attitude toward Tonight Show interviews was the same casual indifference that defined his public presence in general. Several producers who collaborated with both men claimed that Martin seldom bothered with pre-in talks and frequently showed up just before his part unprepared for the subjects Carson intended to discuss. Industry insiders noted that Carson was irritated by Martin's interview technique once it was on TV, in a number of specific ways. Carson had to work twice as hard to keep the discussion flowing, because Martin was known for responding to well-crafted queries with a single word. Carson's setups were often interrupted by him before the host could ask the question. The thing that annoyed me the most was that Martin frequently completely ignored questions, instead straying into irrelevant tales that took the conversation in a different path. A former Tonight Show talent coordinator noted, "Johnny hated guests who made the host do all the work, and Dean was the worst offender." The majority of guests realized that their role was to cooperate with the host in order to produce quality television. Dean pretended that by simply showing up, he was helping Johnny. During their on-air conversations, this strategy produced distinctly uncomfortable moments. During one particularly noteworthy visit in 1974, Carson asked a specific question regarding a recent appearance by Frank Sinatra in an attempt to discuss Martin's popular Corny television variety show. Instead of responding, Martin gave a hazy smile and started talking about a recent golf tournament he had attended that had nothing to do with it. Cameras captured Carson's fleeting face, a tiny moment of real irritation before his professional mask returned, and viewers who aren't used to seeing the host lose his cool took note. Carson saw this conduct as a basic misinterpretation of the talk show concept itself. In addition to being disrespectful to him personally, appearing on The Tonight Show was more than simply a publicity stunt. The performance has its own standards and craft. Martin conveyed that he didn't appreciate the form Carson had spent his lifetime honing by dismissing interviews as pointless afterthoughts. When contrasted with other entertainment veterans Carson admired, the difference became even more pronounced. Performers who were Martin's contemporaries, such James Stewart, B. Davis, and Jack Benny, treated their appearances on Tonight's Show with a high level of professionalism, honoring the medium and working with Carson to produce unforgettable TV moments. By contrast, their engagement and preparation emphasized Martin's lack of interest. Staff members who worked directly with Carson around this time said that one of the host's biggest professional annoyances was Martin's informal interview style. Viewers may find Martin's actions refreshingly genuine in contrast to other celebrities' meticulously staged performances, but Carson thought they were practically unprofessional, a perspective he privately voiced but was able to almost hide on television. Music 3. The swagger of the Rat Pack annoyed Carson. There were two main masculine stereotypes that dominated the 1960s entertainment scene. The Gang of Rats stood on one side. Joey Bishop, Peter Lawford, Sammy Davis Jr., Dean Martin, and Frank Sinatra. A group that personified a particular type of male companionship based on heavy drinking, womanizing, insider jokes, and a coolness that bordered on aggression. Carson, on the other hand, was equally successful but reflected a more restrained Midwestern attitude that prioritized inclusivity over exclusivity and humor over swagger. These divergent strategies revealed underlying differences in perceptions of celebrity in general, men who set their own rules and demanded that others follow their every move. The Rat Pack functioned like entertainment aristocracy. Despite his great success, Carson remained professional, believing that hard effort and talent, not natural uniqueness, had earned him his position. Carson and Martin's philosophical differences naturally led to conflict, especially when it came to how famous people ought to act in formal settings. Many NBC executives and Tonight Show employees have said that Carson was genuinely offended by the arrogant attitude of the Rat Pack, seeing it as a holdover from a previous Hollywood period that ran counter to his more democratic approach to entertainment. One veteran NBC executive said, "Johnny wasn't a member of the Rat Pack, and insiders say he despised their arrogant insider club attitude." This tension showed itself subtly during Martin's Tonight Show performances, with Dean's feeling always being, "You're lucky to have me." Johnny's response, though he would never say it aloud, was basically, "Don't bother showing up next time." Although Carson showed evident respect for the majority of famous performers, his dealings with Martin frequently had a subtle professional distancing that was barely noticeable beyond the surface friendliness. The way each man treated the production team was one instance where the conflict of values was most noticeable. Carson was recognized for consistently showing respect to photographers, stagehands, and production helpers, even if he was sometimes a pain in the neck with network executives. He created a happy work environment while learning names, recognizing birthdays, and upholding professional limits. Martin, on the other hand, frequently introduced the hierarchical perspective of celebrity held by the Rat Pack to the Tonight Show set. Several employees have reported that he rarely knew the names of crew members, occasionally made offensive remarks to female employees, and generally acted as though stars of his size were exempt from standard workplace regulations. As the entertainment industry started to move away from the Rat Pack paradigm of male celebrity toward more deliberate, equality-minded tactics, Carson's disdain of this mindset grew stronger over time. Martin's unchanging Rat Pack attitude started to seem more and more out of date in the Tonight Show setting as Carson changed with the times, progressively bringing in a wider range of guests and discussing more important subjects. The two men's intellectual differences had grown significantly by the middle of the 1970s. Carson had solidified his position as the leading interviewer on television, a considerate host who succeeded by letting his guests shine instead than controlling them with his own personality. Martin stuck to his identification as a member of the Rat Pack, a celebrity who preferred accommodation and difference to teamwork. Beyond personality issues or professional differences, this fundamental divergence in how they saw their roles in entertainment established an unbridgeable split. It stood for two opposing ideas on what celebrity is, one based on uniqueness and intrinsic specialness. In the Tonight Show's increasingly Carson-defined paradigm, the other on skill and earned respect just couldn't be reconciled. "You're out here doing some shows, John. came out to retrieve the empty containers. The empty ones. 4. While intoxicated, Dean overshadowed him. In the entertainment industry, professional rivalries frequently center on isolated episodes that serve as a catalyst for larger conflicts. Events that, although seemingly insignificant to outsiders, have a profound impact on the relationships between great personalities. One such crucial occasion for Carson and Martin happened during a 1975 NBC roast that was meant to honor a network boss. Major NBC performers performed hilarious tributes at the event, which took place at the Beverly Hilton Hotel. As the greatest celebrity on the network, Carson was assigned the important post of Master of Ceremonies. He prepared for the role with his usual eloquence, creating a series of witty, occasion-appropriate quips. Martin, on the other hand, was given a 5-minute part in the center of the show. Several guests said that he was clearly drunk when he arrived, not in the Dean Martin manner, but actually inebriated. For a moment, network management contemplated removing him from the schedule, but finally concluded that denying a performer of his caliber the opportunity to perform would cause more issues than letting him. NBC insiders of the time consider what transpired next to be legendary. Martin gave what many in attendance called the most humorous performance of the evening despite his illness. He riffed extemporaneously for over double his allocated time, seemingly without preparation or effort, producing constant laughs with seemingly entirely spontaneous material. Having spent days crafting his speech, Carson was now in the awkward position of having to follow Martin's unplanned victory. Even though he presented his information with expertise, there was a clear contrast. Martin's rambling performance seemed to contrast with Carson's well-crafted gags, which seemed almost stiff. According to a network executive who saw the aftermath, Carson was enraged backstage and labeled Dean a lazy drunk with better writers. This remark, which was made in private out of irritation, exposed Carson's main complaint: the assumption that Martin's seeming spontaneity concealed extensive uncredited writers behind the scenes preparation, giving the impression of effortlessness that Carson felt was dishonest and demeaning to actors who admitted to depending on writing teams. The event happened at Carson's core as a professional in several ways. Initially, it strengthened the unjust belief that Martin's innate ability somehow outstripped Carson's more blatantly contrived strategy. Second, it implied that seeming improvisation may overshadow preparation, which is the foundation of Carson's professional philosophy. Lastly, it openly praised the exact conduct that Carson deemed most unprofessional: attending a performance while intoxicated. Following this incident, Carson's personal remarks on Martin grew notably more harsh. Staff from The Tonight Show around this time period claim that Carson started to publicly express his displeasure with Martin's approach to entertainment, namely, the inconsistency between Martin's meticulously crafted, carefree character and the evident effort that went into upholding that image. What the way that this episode questioned Carson's customary position of control in entertainment situations made it more noteworthy. Carson managed the atmosphere on The Tonight Show. He set the time for visitors to speak, the length of the segments, and the conclusion of the conversations. That control disappeared at the roast, allowing Carson to face Martin head-to-head on an equal basis. This emphasized their disparate performance styles in ways that obviously hurt Carson's more methodical approach. The roast. Although the episode greatly exacerbated pre-existing tensions, it did not cause the gap between the two men on its own. It validated Carson's hunch that Martin's indolent methods were given more credit than his own hard-working efforts. For those close to Carson, it served as a point of reference for comprehending his increasing hesitancy to have Martin on The Tonight Show. This hesitation would finally solidify into total exclusion. I'm not sure. Proceed. Did you have anything else? I have nothing. No, I'm going to leave. I have no idea why I am This is exactly where it is. 5. The fake character was too much for Carson to handle. The main source of Carson's resentment of Martin was not his drinking per se, but rather what Carson saw as the falsity of Martin's well-known inebriated persona. Understanding the extent of Carson's contempt requires an awareness of this distinction. It was more about performance and sincerity than it was about moral judgment about drinking. Martin meticulously nurtured his reputation as a carefree drinker throughout his career, frequently showing out on television and stage with a glass in hand, often filled with apple juice rather than real alcohol. Numerous individuals claim that this endearing inebriated figure became his hallmark, so much so that, despite Martin's true condition, audiences requested and expected it. In contrast, Carson's career was founded on a distinct form of authenticity. The Johnny Carson viewers saw on The Tonight Show was essentially consistent with The Private Man, despite the fact that he undoubtedly portrayed a well-manufactured public persona. His Nebraskan directness, dry wit, and emotional restraint were not affectations, but rather extensions of his own personality that had been meticulously refined for TV. The two performers developed a philosophical rift as a result. According to Carson, being genuinely honest about oneself was necessary for establishing a connection with an audience. An intricately crafted persona that might not have had much to do with Martin's true nature served as the foundation for his whole career. On My Stage, a former NBC executive who knew both men said that Johnny instructed him, "If you're going to drink, drink, but don't lie to people about who you are." Carson's main point of contention was captured in this comment. Martin didn't drink excessively all the time. Many of Carson's most cherished visitors did, but he had constructed a whole public persona around an inauthentic drinking performance. When rumors started to circulate in entertainment circles in the 1970s that Martin's well-known intoxication was becoming more and more of an act, the problem became more apparent. According to several people who worked with Martin around this time, he was frequently totally sober during performances in which he looked inebriated, continuing to play the part his audiences anticipated while actually practicing a great deal of self-control behind the scenes. This realization changed Martin's character from being merely unpleasant to being essentially dishonest in Carson's eyes. If Martin was acting sober while feigning intoxication, he was effectively satirizing the real difficulties faced by those who suffer from alcoholism while evading the professional repercussions of actual impairment. This viewpoint explains why Carson remained friendly with celebrities like Peter O'Toole and Richard Burton, who had real drinking issues but became progressively aloof with Martin. With regard to their demons, the former were candid. The latter had created a complex lie that Carson believed went against his principles as an entertainer. Carson's focus on authenticity went beyond drinking to include more general issues with public identity and performance. Guests who arrived with clearly rehearsed anecdotes presented as spontaneous recollections, or who developed public personas that drastically differed from their private ones, were notoriously despised by him. According to Carson, Martin was the extreme of this strategy, a performer whose whole public persona might have been a meticulously constructed lie. This philosophical dispute was a reflection of broader societal changes in the 1970s, as viewers began to place a higher emphasis on authenticity than on the more manufactured celebrity personas of earlier times. While Martin stayed dedicated to an earlier kind of celebrity based on meticulously maintained illusions, namely, the inconsistency between Martin's meticulously crafted, carefree character and the evident effort that went into upholding that image. The way that this episode questioned Carson's customary position of control in entertainment situations made it more noteworthy. Carson managed the atmosphere on The Tonight Show. He set the time for visitors to speak, the length of the segments, and the conclusion of the conversations. That control disappeared at the roast, allowing Carson to face Martin head-to-head on an equal basis. This emphasized their disparate performance styles in ways that obviously hurt Carson's more methodical approach. The roast. Although the episode greatly exacerbated pre-existing tensions, it did not cause the gap between the two men on its own. It validated Carson's hunch that Martin's indolent methods were given more credit than his own hard-working efforts. For those close to Carson, it served as a point of reference for comprehending his increasing hesitancy to have Martin on The Tonight Show. This hesitation would finally solidify into total exclusion. "I'm not sure." "Proceed. Did you have anything else?" "I have nothing. No, I'm going to leave. I have no idea why I am." "Shh. This is exactly where it is. 5. The fake character was too much for Carson to handle. The main source of Carson's resentment of Martin was not his drinking per se, but rather what Carson saw as the falsity of Martin's well-known inebriated persona. Understanding the extent of Carson's contempt requires an awareness of this distinction. It was more about performance and sincerity than it was about moral judgment about drinking. Martin meticulously nurtured his reputation as a carefree drinker throughout his career, frequently showing out on television and stage with a glass in hand, often filled with apple juice rather than real alcohol. Numerous individuals claim that this endearing inebriated figure became his hallmark. So much so that, despite Martin's true condition, audiences requested and expected it. In contrast, Carson's career was founded on a distinct form of authenticity. The Johnny Carson viewers saw on The Tonight Show was essentially consistent with the private man, despite the fact that he undoubtedly portrayed a well-manufactured public persona. His Nebraskan directness, dry wit, and emotional restraint were not affectations, but rather extensions of his own personality that had been meticulously refined for TV. The two performers developed a philosophical rift as a result. According to Carson, being genuinely honest about oneself was necessary for establishing a connection with an audience. An intricately crafted persona that might not have had much to do with Martin's true nature served as the foundation for his whole career, which Carson perceived as a personal slight rather than a professional annoyance. Carson found the cancellation especially insulting. Because it happened just weeks before the show was scheduled to be filmed, producers had to reorganize segments that had been scheduled around Martin's involvement due to his withdrawal, which presented logistical issues. The perceived personal rejection and this practical difficulty made for the ideal environment for Carson's renowned ability to harbor resentment. Following this incident, Martin's name was apparently added to a very small list of celebrities who were essentially prohibited from appearing on The Tonight Show while Carson was host. The Martin exclusion persisted for the rest of Carson's tenure as host, in contrast to other brief exiles that Carson periodically enforced and then revoked. More than 10 years of total exclusion from the most significant advertising medium, television. This final breach is especially noteworthy since it turned a professional rivalry into a personal conflict. Before this episode, the main source of Carson and Martin's disagreements had been their divergent views on entertainment, which had been annoying but ultimately professional. Carson, known for his professional compartmentalization and emotional control, could not forgive the personal dimension that the anniversary special rejection brought. Martin's prolonged exile from The Tonight Show had a significant impact on his career. Having access to Carson's platform would have given him important chances to maintain public attention and promote initiatives as his career progressed. Carson used what may have been his most important influence on the entertainment industry by shutting this door. The power to choose the recipients of the visibility that only The Tonight Show could offer to maintain a career. Something crucial about Carson's personality is revealed in this last chapter of their tumultuous relationship. Beneath his amiable exterior, there was a man who valued loyalty, respect, and professional etiquette much. Martin learned the boundaries of Carson's well-known tolerance when he transgressed these fundamental rules, instantly changed from a guest to a permanent outsider in the most significant realm of television.